Frank Yosa here, CEO of Ketone, and today I got a phone call from two professional cyclists from Europe that asks, how to use ketone esters. And oftentimes I'll have this 1 hour conversation with individual athletes, but by recording it now with their permission, I can then send people this video so they can watch the first, 1 hour worth of, how to use it. And then we can, take it from there and customize it to people's needs, after understanding the basics. So thanks, guys. You can feel free to chime in anytime you have a particular question. So let's see, where do I start? I don't have anything prepared or written, but the high level understanding of it is that it's a drastically different fuel source than glucose. So it is not like caffeine, where you can just simply add it at any time of the ride and then you get a caffeine boost. Ketones don't work that way. There's a play between ketones and glucose, and many people like to do this concept of a dual fuel, where you add glucose and you add ketones on top of it, and it sounds very sexy, saying you have two fuels, but it's not necessarily the best way to use it. And I'll go over some examples of how to use it. So the three best ways that the ketone ester works are: one, at altitude. So the ketone ester just works exponentially better at altitude. So if we're talking about at training camp at altitude, or if we're talking about, during a race, if you're going to be hitting altitudes, it just drastically helps the oxygen, the breathing, especially people that already have asthma. It makes it much better for them. We don't know exactly why it helps people that are asthmatic. We don't know if it's an anti-inflammatory effect or if it's that the heart is more efficient, so it can just it's not being taxed as much. So altitude is where it works the best. Number two is hills. So just hill workouts, it works better. And that has to do with the slow twitch muscles have more mitochondria, whereas the fast twitch muscles have no mitochondria. So it just really helps fuel the slow twitch muscles. So much so that some people, when they're playing around with it, and you should not use this in a race for 2, 3, 4 months until you really, really understand it, because you use it in a race and you change one variable. We've had people drop out of races, triathlon races, just drop out because they took too much. They took it without, with food, and their blood sugar dropped, and they had a blood sugar of 60, and they felt like they had a monkey on their back. So, yeah, it works better with the hills. And then the third thing is on a fasted ride. So fasted workouts, fasted rides. If you don't currently do fasted rides, I'm not necessarily saying to switch, because that's a huge variable and too many variables. But if you already do some rides, workouts fasted, that's when it has just much more of an exponential noticeable benefit. So if you're an athlete that takes 2 or 3 gel packs before your workout, which is, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 calories, and then you're trying to say, oh, let's see if the ketones work, and then you just take 15, 30 calories of ketones without that 300 calories of glucose, and then you're like, oh, I didn't really notice a difference. Well, that's not a really good comparison. There might be differences maybe after an hour and a half. You might be, there might be some differences there, but for the most part, it's much more advantageous fasted. Let me jump back real quick to the hills. So a rider has to also pick the cadence that they're cycling. So one thing to keep in mind is ketones are going to be better at the lower gears because it simulates more of a hill. So even having to change your gears might be something to consider. So one rider, Daniel Holloway, doing a 60-minute race, he said that when he was on the hills, he was just in a different gear than everybody else. So something to play around with is your cadence. You might find more energy at the lower gear. So so back to the fasted. I just talked to one doctor trainer that he was able to have his riders, they were already doing fasted rides. He gave them 10 mLs of KE4, so 2 capfuls of KE4 every hour, and it was for the first 3 hours, just 10 mLs before, and then 10 mLs, and then 10 mLs, and then he switched it to 20 mLs for the last 2 hours. And And he was amazed by the results. I don't know the exact numbers, but he was just amazed that they were able to not eat breakfast. So overnight fast, not eat breakfast, and go straight into a workout and be closer to their baseline meaning a bunch of glucose, with just a tiny amount. And they were not hungry. And he was just scratching his head like, how is this possible? Mathematically, you should look at it and say calories, 20, 40, that should burn up in a few minutes. So with that, what we think is happening is a few things. When you eat food, you're wasting a lot of energy breaking down that oatmeal that probably won't even be ready as a fuel source in 2 or 3 hours. Anyhow, you're just eating because you don't want to have that sensation of hunger at the beginning of your ride, because then that will be mentally distracting. Oh, I'm hungry and I don't have fuel. So if you skip the breakfast, you also save, a pound of weight, which, people pay $1,000 for a bicycling handlebars that are, 1 pound lighter. So then they are able to skip breakfast and do the workout. And what we think is happening is that it's triggering endogenous production. And so your body already has a bunch of ketones that it can make itself, but just straight fasted is just not enough. So this augments that, helps keep people fasted so they don't get distracted thinking about food. And, they're able to go multiple hours. The suggestion that I gave to him was try cutting that 20 and 20 back down to 10 to 10. I'm not sure that you necessarily need to go up to 20-20. If it's more of a signaling molecule to signal the body to make its ketones, then, more won't necessarily do that, won't necessarily help with that. So, so that's one way to use it in your workouts is, completely fasted between 5 and 10 mLs every hour, and see how that goes. We had one athlete who was able to do a 7-day training camp, did not eat breakfast, did not eat any food on any of his rides for 7 days. And he was able to take a small amount of ketone ester during the ride. And at the end of the ride, he's like, Frank, I wasn't hungry. I wasn't fatigued and I wasn't hungry. Should I eat dinner? I'm like, I think you should. And he said, should it be ketogenic? I said, I don't know, but just eat a regular meal. Just get your calories back. Cause otherwise he's just after 7 days, he's just going to wilt. So he just forced himself to eat. He wasn't hungry because of the ketone esters. And he was able to do that for multiple days. And the benefits of a fasted ride are numerous, such as lower inflammation. And people do fasted rides and they do altitude rides, even though your watts will go down. No one worries about it. No one says, oh, my watts are 10% lower. Okay, but you're at altitude, you're building, different parts of your system, and you're okay with lower watts. Well, that's why people do fasted rides, because your inflammation is going to be lower. You're going to be burning more fat. There's a bunch of benefits of doing fasted rides, but then with the ketone ester, they're getting back closer to baseline, if not at baseline. So they're having the same wattage output without all the harmful effects. And one side note with inflammation, glucose creates lactic acid. And I know lactic acid can kind of turn into, another fuel in the system, but ketones create zero lactic acid, just none. So, to be able to have no lactic acid in your system just can drastically change how you perform. So those are the top 3 ways to use it. Other things to think about, there's a concept called glycogen sparing, which I'm not necessarily thrilled by. One paper says it is glycogen sparing. Another paper tried to prove that it wasn't. They had a bunch of people take ketone ester and glucose. They waited for the ketone ester to go to 0, and then they did the time trial to see if they were faster. It's kind of funny that the title looks like ketone esters didn't work for time trials, but they actually waited for the ketone ester to go to 0. So it's not the question of whether the ketones worked. And whether it's glycogen sparing is some people think that they can take the ester and then at the end of the race, they'll have all this glucose that hasn't been used and it's been stored and you can good to go. The problem with that is the ketones lower blood sugar. So many people report, and some people actually, professional athletes, have stopped taking ketones during their ride, and they only take it for recovery because it's easier. Recovery, we'll get to that in a second, is easier. But during the ride, the most common problem that people do is they take too much ketone ester. So they take too much ketone ester, the blood sugar drops, and they feel like they're only at 95, 97% capacity. They can't get to that 100% when they need to do a sprint. Well, a few things there. be aware of that. Watch your intake. More is not always better. It can, it can blunt your glucose uptake as well. But by being, it might need to change people's race strategy, which is a really difficult concept. If you know that you're only able to get that 95, 98%, well, then you might have to kick earlier. Like literally, everyone knows that you have to kick at the kick, meaning start your final sprint at the 200-meter mark. You might have to start at the 800-meter mark or whatever, double the distance. And people might laugh at you and say, oh, he went out too fast. But because you're able to maintain that 95 for longer, then they aren't able to catch up to you. And I did get a text message from, a doctor saying, look, so-and-so won this race. And I said, did he go out early? And he goes, absolutely. And everyone laughed at him. So when you have this different fuel source, it just does different things. So you have to be very aware of it before you, do it on game day. And every variable matters, whether you add an apple, add a power bar or something like that, that can change everything. We had one marathon runner who was taking it multiple days in practice, really loved it, fasted. And then on race day for the marathon, a 2.5-hour race for him, he added an apple and a power bar. I said, well, why'd you do that? It's like, oh, well, I can't run 2 hours, without having some food. And sure enough, he said, Frank, it felt heavy. It felt difficult. My time was slow. It just didn't work for him. I said, well, you should have stuck with the protocol that you tried in practice. You can't change, that one thing. So if it is triggering endogenous production, that apple and power bar could have just stopped it. And then he was, without fuel. He then went back to just use it in workouts. Workouts and training. And then a few weeks later, because he runs a marathon like once a month, a few weeks later, he went back to his regular food protocol. So no ketone ester in the race, but he had used it multiple days leading up to it for his workouts. And he said, Frank, could the ketones still be in my system? Because I had an 18-month PR. I felt light on my feet. It felt easy and effortless. Were the ketones still in the system? And he had, regular, he probably ate his power bar and, apple normally like he normally did, but he took no ketones during the ride. And I said, no, it was just that you were drastically more recovered. He wasn't used to being that level of, tapering down and being recovered by loading it up the week beforehand. The ketones weren't necessarily in the system, but if it builds mitochondria and that can last, for days, if not weeks, then he just, felt much more fresh. Let's see. Do you have any questions? We can kind of spin off from that baseline.
Yeah, I think in professional cycling, it really is not possible to go like fully ketogenic, to not eat and train, I think. And especially if you want to do like big efforts, I think it's hard to do it like that.
Well, yeah, but this cycling doctor was in a world tour team, and they were able. He's a professional cyclist, the same type of 5-hour cycling, and he was baffled. He was thrown, But I'm not saying to do a ketogenic diet. That's different. So that's. I'm not saying that they changed the ketogenic diet. It was just regular meals at night, and then in the morning they skipped breakfast, and then they tried it. So this is something that you can try one day. You can try 2 days, and prove me wrong. But yes, it will be harder to have those bursts. So if you have a 10-minute burst, a 5-minute burst, 2-minute burst, yes, you might not be as good as those at those, but then you'll be more recovered for that second burst. So one thing that Dr. Dag says is he'd find an athlete that said that the ketone ester didn't work. He'd fly out to Italy and be next to them. He'd put on a continuous glucose monitor, have them ride for 2 hours, and then he'd have them do a burst of 10 minutes hard and then off, and then 5 minutes hard and then 2 minutes hard, with some time in between. He'd have them ride for 2 hours, and then he'd do the second 10, 5, 2. And that is where he saw the big gains, is that second round of burst, because it was almost as if they had recovered because of the ketones. They had recovered in between that 2-hour time span between bursts. So but he does not do fasted. He does not do fasted. Let's be clear. He does a protocol that you'd have to check. I think it's like a 3-to-1 ratio of glucose to ketones. So that's his way of taking it. But I just got a protocol sheet from a doctor that said that I could share it, and I'm actually going to try and get him on the podcast. And he uses just the ketones. So yeah, you've got to see how you do in those bursts, and then maybe you don't do as well in the first burst, but then the second burst, you're just recovered and fresh. And then, you just have to pace yourself.
Yeah, the fatigue resistance will be higher.
Yeah. And also, so some people use it for their mind. So towards the end of the race, you've got to watch out, because the end of the race, you've got the sprint, but then towards the end of the race, your mind, after 3 or 4 hours, stops taking glucose. It just, even if you took more glucose, the brain just starts to wander. Some people will just take the ketone ester to bring their brain back. So then the motivation comes back, the sharpness comes back. But you don't want to take too much, because then if you take it right towards the end of the race, you might inhibit that sprint. So, there might be a time where you can find it there. We have a 50 miler, and I did a podcast with him, and I said, if someone didn't believe in ketones and they only had one shot, and you wanted to have them try it, what would you recommend? He said, go for your normal super long run, multi-hour run. And once your mind starts fading, take 10 mLs of KE4, 2 capfuls, a little swig of that, and you'll see within 5 minutes, your brain snaps back, and that has a completely different benefit. So it's the way that it works with the brain is the brain stops utilizing glucose after a certain number of hours. It just says, no more. Even if you take more glucose, you have this impairment where the brain isn't being fully fueled. Ketones bypasses that blockage and just reaches the brain and turns the brain on. So some people use it selectively towards, the end of the race when their mind starts to go, but not necessarily, near the sprints, because then you have that sprinting problem. So it's very tricky. It takes a long time for people to master, but when people do master it, it's very noticeable, and everyone has a different, technique. So let's talk about recovery. Recovery is
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure, please.
Because you said the 3 ways to use it, and like you say, now it's very, very individual. Like when you use it during race or when you use it during training, you say you really need to monitor your glucose levels, and it's really dependent of eating an apple, eating a bar, depending on the days, depending on different persons also, I think. So if you want to use it during race or during training, it's like you say, you really have to monitor your glucose during months to see what's the best protocol for yourself, or there's no like general rule.
Exactly. I mean,
when it comes to using it during
Dag
race
says,
during training.
Yeah, Dr. Dag said everyone needs to write their own manual. Everyone's different. There's one athlete who's able to take, and I hesitate saying this because someone's going to try to take the maximum amount, but they can take multiple bottles of this per day. For some reason, their system, it doesn't drop their blood glucose. They can just use more and more of the energy. So I won't even say how many bottles they're able to take, but usually we're telling people to take less and less. But this one person, he happens to be an outlier, hyper responder, and is able to just go on and on with higher quantities. Now with him, I'm not clear whether he takes it with glucose. My guess would be yes. But everyone is drastically different. So recovery is where many athletes have just settled back on, I'm just going to use it for recovery, or their team says, hey, recovery, that's the very easy protocol. And we'll go over that. That's no brainer. The recovery protocol is not going to mess up the day of racing, right? Because you're already done racing. So like the risk is a lot lower. So that's why a lot of people have stopped using it during the race, because it's trickier and they haven't really flushed it out how to use it best. So they just use it for recovery. When I get to talking to them and I kind of explain, they tell me, oh, but when I use ketones, I feel flat. Like sometimes I even say the phrase before they even say it. They say, oh, I bet you felt flat. Like you didn't get that top speed. I said, yes. How'd you know that? I'm like, well, because you took too much. So then I encourage them to try less and less and see how that works. But for recovery, there was one Peter Hespel paper where they were simulating a Tour de France, and they did 10 to 15 days of multi-hour riding, and half the group took glucose and ketone ester, and the other half was just glucose with no ketone ester. And the ketone ester group, at the end, they did a time trial, and the ketone ester group was 15% faster. Okay, so not not, you know, just this 2% stuff, which is, you know, another paper, but a massive 15%. And they were taking it immediately after the race, and they were taking it immediately before bed. The quantities that they were taking were on the high side. So it was a little bit less than a full bottle. So about 50 mLs of this immediately after the ride and immediately before bed. But we'll talk about the sleep protocol in a second. There's no evidence.
Did they eat carbs immediately after training also, or did they say like, look, we only take the ketones now and we wait some hours?
Well,
or is that
a lot of teams, you know, they want to get the ketones in right away, and then 45 minutes later is when they'll take their protein shake or something. I wish I would have more data on that, because Dr. Dag likes to have just ketones with no food for 2 hours, because it triggers, you know, something else in the system that he explains. But many people will reload after 40 minutes. We don't know. We don't know whether the protein. We do have a theory that adding glucose and even protein with the ketones might inhibit the ketones from being able to do their thing. Like it blocks it. Well, the people might say, oh, the heart prefers ketones. Yeah, it says that it prefers ketones, but you know, my body might prefer broccoli, but if I've got candy sitting around, I'm going to take the candy first. So the body kind of takes up that glucose first, and it might block some of the ketone benefits. So that's something where maybe you can play around different days, where one day you just take the ketone ester and hold off for 2 hours, and you know, see if you feel much more recovered the next day. And then another day.
But it makes kind of sense also, no?
What's that?
If you take, for example, the ketones after training and you eat candy afterwards, immediately afterwards, the body is used to always get the sugar. So maybe it says, well, let's use the sugar to recover and not the ketones.
Yeah, exactly.
It's used to get the sugars constantly.
Yeah, and everyone says, oh, but you need, the mantra has always been for the last 50 years, carbs are king. Everything is carbs, carbs. Yeah, because this new food group, you know, fat, protein, carbs, ketones just never existed before. So now, you know, if carbs is king, then maybe ketones are the emperor. So you have to play around with different things. Some people take their recovery shake 40 minutes later, but getting the ketones in, you know, immediately after the ride. We have some people finishing the races, and you know, the bag that they're given, you know, has ketones in it. As far as how much to take, sure, you can take the entire 50 mLs if money is no object, but we have many people that are not in the professional world that can take as little as 5 to 10 mLs, so tiny amounts, and they're noticing benefits. Now you could say it's placebo, it's in their head, okay, sure, but what I don't want people to do is think that you have to take 50 mLs or nothing. And I did talk to some riders, you know, that were taking it during the ride, and they said, oh, well, I stopped taking ketones because it didn't work, so they went from 50 down to 0. And I said, well, try less, try 20, try 15, try 10. So even on the recovery, you might not necessarily need as much. So try different amounts. And especially many cyclists are on the lightweight side. So, you know, taking 2 capfuls will raise your blood ketones at least 1, if not 1.3 for a lighter rider. So, you know, try taking less and see how that does. And then sleep time.
And if you let's say you take 30, it's better to take 2 times 50 after training and before sleep, or better to just take the 30 immediately after training? Or is that really the same?
You're talking about taking 15 mLs after training, then 15 mLs before bed?
Yeah, or just 30 after training.
Or 30 after training. Yeah. So there's so we don't know, first of all. So you have to try different things. But let's talk about the sleep protocol. The benefit of the sleep, taking it before bed, is that there's nothing interrupting it for 12 hours. You take the ketone ester and there's no food, nothing, just lets it do its thing. And so we don't know which one helps, you know, recovery more. So you could try 15-15, and you can try 30 and 0. There is potential downside of too much before bed, where it does not exist. Taking it, you know, too much after your workout, maybe you'll get low blood sugar, depending on, you know, where your blood sugar spikes might be. So you have to be aware of that. You don't want to, you know, fall down if your blood sugar is too low, right? But taking it immediately before bed, if you take too much before bed, it will mess up your sleep. And we found that the amount that you can take before bed is directly related to how tired you are. Okay. So if I did not work out one day and that night I take 10 mLs, and I did not work out, 10 mLs will ruin my sleep personally. Okay. But these Tour de France riders are taking 50 mLs immediately before bed. But it's a function of how tired you are. So if the body is super wrecked and destroyed, it's almost as if the ketones work to clean up all of the mess that is in there before it turns into an energy source to turn on your mind and make you feel awake. My wife, for example, when she goes from being not keto to being ketogenic, because if you're already ketogenic, it does have a multiplying effect. If she's not ketogenic, she can take 5 mLs. But when she turns ketogenic, if she takes that 5 mLs, I came up at 10, 11 p.m. I'm like, what are you doing? I thought you'd be sleeping. And she was like arranging her closet. Like it kicked in. She's like, oh, I forgot to lower the amount because I went ketogenic. She had too much ketones. So you want to find that fine point that is just not enough to ruin your sleep. And when I say ruin your sleep, it'll make your sleep feel lighter. Like one eye is half open, the whole night feels light. When it works, people report 30 minutes more deep sleep. So they have an Oura ring on and they can just see, here's my sleep all week. And then here's my sleep with the ketone ester. And it goes up 30 minutes. And we have had professional riders that they heard through their doctor, you should take 50 mLs, before bed, because that's what the HESPL study did. Okay. But the variable that is not correct was that day they did only 1 hour of riding, or it was an off day. And then they still taking the same amount as HESPL, but there's a variable of that 5 hours missing. So it matters how much you take. And if cost is an issue, taking it before bed, I think, is the most cost-effective way. If you only took it one way, you only had $5 a day worth of a budget to take it, I would just take it before bed, because I think that is your best bang for the buck in recovery. People wake up more fresh. Their heart rate variability numbers are better. A quick story with Greg Henderson, 5 or 6, 7 years ago now, he was in the Tour de France and some cyclist dropped the bottle on the side of the road and they freaked out for many miles. And then he's like, why don't they just get another bottle from the car? What's the big deal? Then he went back to the bus and found out that they were using the $6,000 bottle of ketone ester. So then he said, oh, now I understand. We gave him the ketone ester. He did it at altitude. We didn't realize at the time that he had done it at altitude. So he was expecting his watts to be 10% lower. And when he had his workout, his watts were right back at baseline. So we thought that it was a 10% increase, but it wasn't so much that it was a 10% increase. It was that he was expecting, because of altitude, to be 10% lower, but he just was at his regular baseline. So he was freaking out about that. But then the next day, his heart rate variability scores, and he did not take it immediately after, and he did not take it before bed. He took it during the ride and before the ride. And his heart rate variability scores, because he has a monitor around his chest, said that he had taken the day off. Like, that's how rested he was. And he was more freaking out about the recovery aspect. He said that's where you have the huge gains, not so much whether that race might be some 10% is a lot, but a bunch of watts higher. But to be able to be so recovered that the next day you can do another hard workout, and that is what has the compounding effect, for game day. So yeah, sleep you can take anywhere as little as 5 mLs, and some people take as much as 50. I think that's way too high. Also have to watch out for the placebo effect and the opposite of placebo effect, where if you're nervous about taking the ketone esters before bed, that can ruin your sleep in and of itself. So go ahead, start with next to nothing. Start with half of a capful. Start with nothing. Start with 1 capful, and then you can build it up. I don't think 50 mLs is necessary before bed. I think that's overkill, but try different amounts. I would recommend 5 to 20 mLs before bed, depending on how hard the day was. And then as far as right after, so that's before bed, but that's that same amount immediately after the ride. As little as 5 ml, probably won't do anything at 5, but you can try as little as 5 ml and easily go to 20 or 30 mLs. You can go a little bit on the higher side because there's less risk of messing up your sleep.
So if you mute it, you would always say start low increase it gradually, and then look where like the turning point is.
Well, especially for sleep. So the sleep is because the sleep is just very easy. How was my sleep last night? It's just very easy. As far as post workout, it's a little bit harder to discern. So the post workout, you can maybe go straight to the 20, and then you can actually kind of, okay, great, that worked. Let's see if 15 does the same. Let's do the 10. You'd almost actually go in the opposite direction with you can do it either way, whichever one you prefer, but there would be no problem if you post workout, you took the larger amount and then started, see that it works and then cut back. If you take a large amount before bed, it can wreck your sleep. And also keep in mind that there is a cumulative benefit. If you do end up taking it just before bed, then your amount is going to be a little bit different than if you take it immediately after the workout and before bed. Okay, so if you go for the maximum 30 or 50 mLs immediately after workout, you could go down on the nighttime because it does have a little bit of a cumulative effect.
Okay.
So then there's loading before a big race. So kind of like that marathon athlete, he kind of did it by accident. He was taking ketones, the week before in training. So if there's a budget concern, you can't take it, every day for multiple months. Or if you're going to the training camp, consider taking it, 1 week beforehand, either after your slow rides, if you're kind of not doing hard workouts, or if you're doing it just immediately before bed. 1 week beforehand can really help make you more fresh for that training camp and for race day. So if you don't have the budget to be able to do it every day for multiple months, and you just want to be targeted about it, loading it up before the race is also beneficial.
And how much do we suggest then to take in? Also like 5 to 20 or?
Well, if your workout is, let's say normally in your training camp, you might do 3 to 5 hours of riding, but here you're only doing, if the week beforehand, you're only doing an hour workout. Okay, then take, 10 to 20 mLs afterward and 5 to 10 mLs before bed. So, cut it in half compared to the higher intensity, working out.
And another question about that: is your body getting used to the ketones? Like it's like with carbs, like some people can do 90. If you try more and more, you can go to 120. It's the same with ketones. If you use it for months, even for years, is your body getting used to it, and can you consume more of them, or is there no relation like that?
Great question. We don't know. There's this one concept called MCT transporters that it helps. The more you've had ketones in your system, the more the pipeline grows to get it out of your blood and into your system. We've seen that a lot with people that are on a ketogenic diet for many years. Their blood ketones go lower and lower. It doesn't mean that they're making less ketones. It just happens to be that we test their blood and it says 1.2. But if your system is able to suck up those ketones and use them faster, your numbers are going to show lower and lower. So we have seen people on a diet, ketogenic diet, go lower and lower. We don't know. I don't have any experience with anyone saying I've been able to slowly increase it, where before, if I took that amount, it would mess me up, but now I can use it. We don't have experience with that. It's possible that your body gets used to using it. I don't know. Great question though. That's very, very interesting. Whether people,
thanks.
And the opposite of that question, is, would it stop working over time? Like caffeine, you take caffeine multiple times and you kind of have, this effect where it stops working. And what we have seen is on the mind, some people, outside of sport, they said, oh, the ketones stopped working. But what happened was they had this thing called a brain energy gap, where their brain is only being fueled 70% by glucose, and then the last 30%, nothing. So they have brain fog. They take the ketone ester and it fuels them up to 100%. It's not a stimulant. So that if they were already at 100%, it doesn't really take you to 110, 120 unless you take a really large amount, but we won't get into that. It's not really a stimulant. So these people, over time, they were taking the ketone ester and their baseline went up 70, 80, 90. So then when they took the ketone ester, that differential didn't seem like it was doing anything. Like they just felt, hey, I'm normal. So then we have them stop taking the ketone ester for 2 or 3 days, and their system goes back to their 70 baseline. They feel the brain fog and they go, oh, I guess that just, that wasn't me. So they thought that it was stopping working. It was just that their baseline was getting better. So then the marginal improvement every time they took a shot wasn't as noticeable. But it shouldn't, there's no reason to believe that it stops working as a fuel source, over time.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see what else. So you got the altitude. So the hill workouts, if you're able to time a hill that's coming up and taking anywhere from, maybe as little as 5, but 10 to 15, 20 mLs right before the hill, we're talking maybe 2 to 5 minutes before the hill. I mean, it kicks in pretty fast. So the peak in your blood is at 45 minutes when you're in a rested state. But if you have your blood flowing, people say that they feel it mentally, pretty fast. Some people, if they're really adventurous, they'll actually, this is kind of gross, but they'll keep it under their tongue a while. They think that it absorbs faster or more. I don't know. But that allows them to cut the cost, take it a little bit less. Another thing people do is we have this. So our main drink is ketone ester, the KE4, like 90% of our sales is that. And that's 50% ketone ester, 50% water. And it's the D form, which is the good form. And it's the same molecule that's used in all these papers, and Peter Hespel only uses our product. But we have KE1, which is another drink that we have that tastes much better, but it's a mixture of the active ingredient is 60% ketone ester and then 40% ketone free acid, ketone salt. So it's not like the regular ketone salts that are on the market. I don't have one here, but that have 2 to 4 grams of salt, just huge salt load. It's like 90% less total salt on a gram per gram basis. The benefit of that drink is if you wanted to slow release it into your water bottle. So you can slow release, and that can be something you can play with the KE4, putting it into your water bottle and just, slowly getting some more ketones. But it tastes bad enough taking a shot of it, but diluting it in a big water bottle makes the entire water bottle taste nasty. The KE1 dilutes very well. So it's a good way to get, some more ketones and actually taste pretty decent. So you could, if you don't care about taste, great, put KE1 in some water. Some people do that. The benefit of slow releasing it in a water bottle is you might not get the blood glucose crash, and you might be able to just have, a more sustained ketone release. That's something to play with. As far as a continuous glucose monitor and having to check that all the time, it's more ideal if you can have a continuous glucose monitor and kind of see where your levels are real time. But if you don't have one, you just be aware of feeling light. If you're lightheaded, you'll just know that your blood glucose is too low. And even just popping some food or some gel at that time to kind of bring you back up, not a lot, just a little bit to kind of bring, pop it back up. We do have a separate drink, which we're going to be getting back in stock here soon, called snake water, which is similar to the KE1, but then we added a slow carbohydrate called isomaltulose. And the idea there is for some people who blood glucose drops too much, this keeps it a little bit of a base from your blood glucose from dropping too much, but it doesn't give you the high glycemic spike and inflammation from sugar. Now that product is not scientifically proven or anything. That's just, 10, 15 ingredients all put in nootropics, and people love it. So that's the snake water drink. Many people that start with KE4 and then move over to KE1 and snake water, they don't come back. And so some people absolutely love the snake water, but some of the researchers and they don't agree with this microdosing concept of being able to take small amounts. They think you have to take these large boluses of ketone ester for it to do anything.
Okay.
I think the microdoses can be very good, but you definitely have to have some experience with it. So I think it's also very, very good to also have like a glucose meter.
Yeah,
when you start discovering it, because otherwise you're really grasping in the dark.
Yeah, but you'll know if you take too much ketone ester and you feel blocked in that last 5%, you'll know, like your watts you normally do, I don't know what you guys do. I don't even want to say a number. You know, you can normally hit a certain number, then you're only, you're 3%, 5% lower than that peak number. You'll know. I mean, they just say, people say, I felt flat. And I said, well, you took too much, ketone ester. Now, another more advanced concept that some teams are looking at is using a slow carbohydrate at the beginning, and then, with the ketones, and then at the end of the race, saving the fast carbohydrates for the sprints. Now, that's a very early thing that I'm trying to figure out. It's a very neat concept that maybe these fast glucoses, regular gel packets, towards the end of your multi-hour ride, your body is just taxed, and just more glucose just is taxed. So when you go into your sprint, the glucose can't be fully utilized. If you can use a slow carbohydrate for the first few hours, and then at the end, hit it with that fast carb that's fresh and hasn't been used all day, how does that help, the end of the race? So there's many, many variables that could be, another 20 years worth of clinical trials to prove out every nuance. But what people are doing is they're trying different things and seeing if they can find a combination that works for them, years before the clinical trials come out.
Yeah, and like you said, would you propose to like take ketone before, let's say, final climb of 10 kilometers? Or do you think that?
Yeah, I would try taking anywhere from 10 to 20 mLs beforehand. And there's nothing wrong with in practice taking too much and seeing what that feels like. I had one athlete who was, and this goes into whether or not you should be ketogenic, and I don't recommend any of the professional athletes go ketogenic because it's just so much more risk. But eventually, I think that's where the world is going, or that's where I think that the science will end up going, is to be ketogenic off season, but maybe even game day. But what he did, he was a ketogenic athlete, and he said money was no object. He wants to do this, 60 minutes straight up altitude climb. I said, go ahead and take a larger amount and just let's work backwards and see what happens when you take too much. You'll probably bonk. And he called me the next day. He was like, oh my God, I hit, whatever 10% faster PR on his normally a 60-minute climb. He did it in 54 minutes, and he'd done that climb, thousands of times. Now it could be placebo because you're drinking this expensive drink and you go on a 60-minute ride. But he was a hyper responder, probably because he was already ketogenic. So his body was able to utilize that fuel without the blood glucose crashing. He didn't have the crashing effect. So that's why maybe in the future, some athletes who are ketogenic, because there are 2 or 3 athletes that are ketogenic that are in the peloton. It's not common, but if those athletes figure out how to incorporate ketone ester on top of that, and they can use the fuel more efficiently, man, that you're going to start seeing more and more people heading in that direction. But it's way too risky right now to ask an athlete to, hey, try to go ketogenic for 4 to 6 months, become fat adapted, and cross your fingers and hope that the ketone ester works much better for you then. Like, no. But it'd be great if someone was looking to retire and they're like, this is my last year because they're just getting older and they want to try something drastically different. Yeah, sure. Try doing ketogenic diet with the ketone ester for multiple months and see what happens. You just less soreness, more hard workouts. But that's the far away future. Right now, I don't recommend people switch to a ketogenic diet. Let's see. I think trying to go through different scenarios of how to take it. Slow releasing during the ride. It's good for travel. If you're doing long distance for travel, people don't get jet lag as much traveling, so you don't eat on the long flight, and you take 5 mLs of KE4 every hour, and then maybe 10 mLs when you arrive. It's really helped with people's jet lag, especially if you're going to Australia or somewhere really far. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think we covered
something stupid. Like after training, you want to get skinny. Can you say, look, I have rest day tomorrow. I can take now, instead of 30 once, I take 5 ml after every 3 hours or every hour, just to don't be hungry.
Oh yeah. So okay, so let's talk about weight loss. So we do not recommend this drink for weight loss for regular consumers because they misunderstand ketones for weight loss and they think that they're drinking ketones and they're in ketosis in 30 minutes because that's what a lot of companies say. And that's very misleading. Ketosis, the definition ketosis can be defined two ways scientifically. One is ketones in your blood. So you test your ketones, you test your blood and you have ketones, and they'll call that nutritional ketosis. But another definition of ketosis is when you haven't eaten for a long time and your body burns your own fat reserves. And then when you test your ketones, there's ketones in your blood. That is what I call real ketosis. Well, when you drink ketones, it skips the fat burning phase and puts ketones in your blood. So some people, consumers, they hear drink ketone ester and you'll be in ketosis. What they hear is I can sit on the couch, drink ketone ester, and my body will be burning fat. It's just so not true. But for an athlete who's trying to lose weight, yeah, you could do the fasted workouts, no breakfast, take the ketone ester during the workout, not be hungry after the 4 or 5 hour workout. And yeah, you can take another 10 mLs every 2 hours and spread it out. And then mealtime, if you want to take in less calories than you might normally do, you're definitely going to be already taking less calories than you normally would in a 24-hour period. But if you want to make that meal shorter, yeah, usually we say no meal an hour or two before and after. But if it helps you make your dinner eat less and not bite you in the butt the next day because you've eaten less, then sure, you're gonna intake less calories and burn more calories in the day and not be hungry. Yeah, you can use that to lose weight if that's what you're trying to do at the training camp. Is that what you guys, because it's all a balance of weight and power, right? So that's why I mentioned the ketone ester might be the trend going into the future, because they can lose massive amounts of weight without being depleted of energy. So if you can be a ketogenic rider and use the ketone ester and be 5 pounds 3 kilos less weight with the same watts as the next person, that's huge. So we don't know yet. Those are all things that have to be tested. But one thing we did test, not fully scientifically, but we had someone do a fasted workout and then the same person doing a fasted workout with a little bit of ketone esters. I think they kept the watts the same, and they were able to detect with a breath mask that they were burning more fat. So they were burning more fat with the small amount of ketone ester. Now that hasn't been proven in a clinical trial, but yeah, we've had multiple instances where people can do multi-hour workouts fasted, and that burns fat.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think we have covered most of it, to be honest. At the moment, I don't have more questions or remarks.
Yeah, I think we covered it. That was really, I'm sorry I didn't have like a perfect bullet point checklist right off the head, but that's, how these conversations go. It's tricky. It's tricky to figure out how to use it, get the right blend. But once you get it, it's very noticeable. People come back. We have huge amounts of resubscription rates, and you see people buying one amount, and then 2 months later they're buying twice the amount, and they're buying more and more.
No, I think it was really helpful. I've learned a lot, and I think we have a lot to try also. So we will make a lot of mistakes, but I think in the end we will find a regime that will work for us.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to pause it here, and then we can continue talking offline. We're back on here. We started talking, and one of the athletes started saying that that the microdosing. I asked him what he'd learned differently than what he expected, and it was about this microdosing concept, because everyone thinks you have to take this large amount. And then he started telling me that one of his teammates was taking the microdosing and having great results. And I said, hey, let's turn on the video again, because I sound crazy telling people to take 10, 20 calories over a 5-hour period and not being hungry. So tell me, what did your friend, who's a cyclist, how much did he take, and what was his experience?
I don't know exactly how much he took. I only know he he started his training without any breakfast, and I can't recall again how much he took, but I think he took maybe during his whole ride of 4 or 5 hours, 1 or 2 bottles.
Okay.
It also includes after the ride, he took also any amount of ketones, and he was really baffled because of the fact that he really didn't had any hunger. He could really push all day, and yeah, I think it's worth trying it.
So that's you know, for 5 hours to go through 2 bottles, that's still a lot. So what he might you said you weren't sure exactly how much he took, but just talk to him and say, hey, some people don't even think about taking less because they think, oh, it just mathematically it's not possible. You know, try different amounts. More is not always better. If it is triggering an endogenous state, more might actually stop the endogenous state. If you drink a huge amount and your blood glucose, your blood ketones skyrocket to 4 or 5 millimolars, what incentive is there for your body to make more ketones? It's not there. So have him try, you know, smaller amounts. So he was able to not have problems with his explosions, like the 10-5-2 explosive workouts, or was it just a 5 hour steady state?
I think it was just an endurance training
Yeah.
to just do for the fat oxidation.
You're right. So if it's just a solid, it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be different than the day that you do the 10-5-2. You might have to have more glucose in those days, or just be aware that your second batch of 10-5-2, you're going to be more recovered because you recover, you know, during the ride. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I sometimes sound a little bit crazy, and then when people actually do it, it's just like, let me get that recorded, because people are doing it. He probably felt like he got the same baseline numbers that he would normally have with multiple hundreds calories of glucose and sore the next day. Did he say anything about like his recovery the next morning, like just feeling not sore or anything?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
He only told me that his baseline power numbers were the same.
Baseline, same as the glucose. And was he able to do this multiple days in a row, or is just one workout that he
No,
was
it was just one day thing.
okay? And there was no glucose too, right? No food, no glucose,
No,
just
nothing.
Yeah.
No, and after the training, he also stayed like 2 hours off
Fasted.
carb.
Yeah, that's from Dr. Dag. So yeah, ask him, tell him to try less, see what happens, and then note your HRV recovery scores for the next day. You know, that's important. And then if he has an attempt or an ability to do it multiple days in a row, that's when you're really going to get the compounding effect. Oh, one other thing with the stage races. So if you have multi-day stage races, that's a really important time to take it, you know, post race, because your recovery for the next day is going to be drastically different than someone, you know, that hasn't, you know, had the ketone ester. So that's when it really, really shines, is a multi-day stage races. If you can't afford it and you don't want to take it during the race, that's fine. And just afterward, for the recovery for the next day, it's very noticeable. Any other stories of any other athletes that you know of on your team or not that used it for different things, or even times that it didn't work, and someone said that they felt blocked from using it too much?
No, that's one of the only stories I know. I think there's still a lot of discovery to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I know still a story of someone who was also 10-day stage race some years ago, and he was also taking it plus recovery after the race and before sleep. But he said always the first hours of the race, I was always feeling that, like you say, like I could push until threshold but not over it, and it was probably he was just first time using it, and it probably was just using too much.
Yeah.
Well, the ketones were still in his body, and he was also saying he was not sleeping really. He was sleeping like, how to say it, not quiet, like nervous, he said. And then probably because he was taking too much. If I listen to you saying now this, because I didn't know you could take too much, because you always think more is better. But
no.
the thing I learned that you can just, with little doses, you can already reach a lot, and then it's also not that costly.
Yeah. So before bed, yeah, you can take too much, and it's just immediately evident the next day. So you can take as little as 2.5, like half of a capful. If you're going to do nothing else half of a capful, one capful, might not do anything, but it's probably doing something deep inside, but yeah, taking too much before bed. Some people go from, the 50 mLs all the way down to 0 because they said it didn't work and they were just, taking too much. So, yeah. All right. Well, I'll pause it here again.